Linux gaming refers to playing and developing video games for the Linux operating system, as an expansion of desktop Linux, involving a Linux kernel, a Euro-based operating system for the typical home computer used for surfing, office applications and additionally for gaming. History. Linux gaming started largely as an extension of the already present Unix gaming scene, with both systems sharing many similar titles. These games were either mostly original or clones of arcade games and text adventures. A notable example of this was the so-called BSD games, a collection of interactive fiction titles. The free software and open-source methodologies which spawn the development of the operating system in general also spawned the creation of various early free games. Popular early titles included NetHack, Drek, XBILL, Xevel, Xbattle, XCONQ and XPILOT. As the operating system itself grew and expanded, the amount of free and open-source games also increased in scale and complexity. The beginning of Linux as a gaming platform for commercial video games is often credited to have begun in 1994 when Dave D. Taylor ported the game Doom in his spare time to Linux as well as many other systems. From there he would also help found the development studio Crack.com, which released the video game Abuse, with the game's Linux port even being published by Linux vendor Red Hat id Software. The original developers of Doom also continued to release their products for Linux. Their game Quake was ported to Linux in 1996, once again by Dave D. Taylor working in his free time. Later id products continued to be ported by David Kirsch and Timothy Bessett respectively, a practice that continued until the studio's acquisition by ZeniMax Media in 2009. In 1995 DUX Software contracted Don Hopkins to port SimCity to Linux. Other early commercial Linux games included Hopkins FBI, an adventure game released in 1998 by MP Entertainment, and Inner Worlds in 1996, which was released for and mostly developed on Linux. In 1998 two programmers from Origin ported Ultima Online to Linux. On November 9, 1998, a new software firm called Lock-E Software was founded by Scott Draker, a former lawyer who became interested in porting games to Linux after being introduced to the system through his work as a software licensing attorney. Lock-E, although a commercial failure, is credited with the birth of the modern Linux game industry. Lock-E developed several free software tools, such as the Lock-E installer, and supported the development of the simple direct media layer, as well as starting the OpenAL audio library project. These are still often credited as being the cornerstones of Linux game development. They were also responsible for bringing 19 high-profile games to the platform before its closure in 2002. Lock-E's initial success also attracted other firms to invest in the Linux gaming market, such as Tribsoft, Hyperion Entertainment, Macmillan Digital Publishing USA, Xatrix Entertainment, and Firelose Laboratories. During this time Michael Sims founded Tux Games, one of the first online Linux game retailers. After Lock-E's closure, the Linux game market experienced some changes. Although some new firms, such as Linux Game Publishing and RuneSoft, would largely continue the role of a standard porting house, the focus began to change with Linux game proponents encouraging game developers to port their game products themselves or through individual contractors. Influential to this was Ryan C. Gordon, a former Lock-E employee who would over the next decade port several game titles to multiple platforms, including Linux. Around this time many companies, starting with id Software, also began to release legacy source code leading to a proliferation of source ports of older games to Linux and other systems. This also helped expand the already existing free and open source gaming scene, especially with regards to the creation of free first-person shooters. The Linux gaming market also started to experience some growth towards the end of the decade with the rise of independent video game development, with many indie developers favoring support for multiple platforms. The Humble Indie Bundle initiatives helped to formally demonstrate this trend, with Linux users representing a sizable population of their purchase base, as well as consistently being the most financially generous in terms of actual money spent. The release of a Linux version of Desera, a digital distribution platform with a primary focus on small independent developers, was also heralded by several commentators as an important step to greater acknowledgement of Linux as a gaming platform. In July 2012, game developer and content distributor Valve Software announced a port of their source engine for Linux, as well as stating their intention to release their Steam digital distribution service for Linux. The potential availability of a Linux Steam client has already attracted other developers to consider porting their titles to Linux. In November 2012, Unity Technologies ported their Unity engine and game creation system to Linux, starting with version 4. All of the games created with the Unity engine can now be ported to Linux easily. In September 2013, Valve announced that they were releasing a gaming-oriented Linux-based operating system called SteamOS, with Valve saying they had come to the conclusion that the environment best suited to delivering value to customers is an operating system built around Steam itself. In March 2014, GOG.com announced they would begin to support Linux titles on their DRM-free store starting the same year, after previously stating they would not be able to due to too many distributions. GOG.com began their initial rollout on July 24, 2014 by offering 50 Linux-supporting titles, including several new to the platform. Market share versus installed base. Market share can be estimated based on sales numbers, EAG. During Q2 2013, 79.3% of smartphones sold worldwide were running Android. When discussing free and open source software, the term installed base seems rather popular. It is installation, not embedment or pre-installation, that tailors a product to the owner's personal needs. Unfortunately, installed base, as opposed to market share, proves to be a tricky thing to gauge. Surveys conducted by software such as Ubuntu Software Center or Steam can only tell about the installed base of a particular program or version or hardware, only on the machines on which the digital distribution software is already installed. Humble Bundle sales for Linux account for 18%. As of March 2014, Steam reports that less than 1.2% of users are using some form of Linux as their platform's primary operating system. Supported hardware. Linux as gaming platform can also refer to operating systems based on the Linux kernel and specifically designed for the sole purpose of gaming. Examples are SteamOS, which is an operating system for Steam machines and computers, video game consoles built from components found in the classical home computer, operating systems like Tizen and Pandora, and handheld game consoles like GP2X, and Neo George X. The NVIDIA Shield runs Android as an operating system, which is based on a modified Linux kernel. The Linux kernel has been ported to numerous instruction sets and platforms. Where the middleware has not been ported, new middleware was written. Where the most parts were released under the GNU GPL, which is a strong copyleft license, these platforms have remained open for everybody. The achievable performance when running a game on top of the Linux kernel with the available device drivers is the only limit. The openness of the Linux software platform will always keep the door open for x86 and ARM competitors such as MIPS and others to design and sell a hardware platform, or various peripherals. As an example, Oculus Rift, which is an upcoming virtual reality head-mounted display, supports the Linux gaming platform. Performance. When employing current proprietary Linux drivers from NVIDIA respectively AMD, the real-world performance of games running on Linux is mostly comparable with them running on Windows 8.1. It is mostly software engineers and programmers who further compare the performance of these proprietary drivers with the performance of the available free and open-source graphics device drivers. Intel is known for distributing their graphics drivers only as free and open-source software for all operating systems they support. Compared to the AMD APUs, Intel dedicates much less die surface to the GPU. The article Free and Open-Source Graphics Device Driver should mention all existing designers of Graphics Accelerator SIP, for the existing support for Linux and the achieved performance under Linux. Please see there. Software architecture. An operating system based on the Linux kernel and customized specifically for gaming, could adopt the vanilla Linux kernel with only little changes, or like the Android be based on a relative extensively modified Linux kernel. it could adopt GNU-C library or Bionic or something like it. The entire middleware or parts of it could very well be closed source and proprietary software. The same is true for the video games. There are free and open source video games available for the Linux operating system, as well as proprietary ones. Linux kernel, the subsystems already mainlined and available in the Linux kernel are most probably performant enough so to not impede the gaming experience in any way. However, additional software is available, such as for example a brainfuck scheduler or the budget fair queuing scheduler. Similar to the way the Linux kernel can be, for example, adapted to run better on supercomputers, there are adaptations targeted at improving the performance of games. A project concerning itself with this issue is called LiquorX. Available software for video game designers, debuggers. Several game development tools have been available for Linux, including GNU Debugger, LLDB, Valgrind, Gilsilang and others. VOGL, a debugger for OpenGL, was released on March 12, 2014. See also Game Editor, Apitrace and GTK Radiant. AMD CodeXL. Available interfaces and SDKs. There are a couple of interfaces and software development kits available for Linux, almost all of them are cross-platform. Most are free and open-source software subject to the terms of the zlib license, making it possible to static link against them from fully closed-source proprietary software. One difficulty due to this abundance of interfaces is the difficulty for programmers to choose the best suitable audio API for their purpose. The main developer of the Pulse Audio project, Lennart Poettering, commented on this issue. Physics engines, audio libraries, that are available as modules for game engines, have been available for Linux for a long time. The book Programming Linux Games covers a couple of the available APIs suited for video game development for Linux, while the Linux Programming Interface covers the Linux kernel interfaces in much greater detail. Available middleware. Beside majority of the software which acts as an interface to various subsystems of the operating system, there is also software which can be simply described as middleware. A multitude of companies exist worldwide, whose main or only product is software that is meant to be licensed and integrated into a game engine. Their primary targets is the video game industry, but the film industry also utilizes such software for special effects. Some very few well-known examples are Classical Physics, Havoc, Newton Game Dynamics and PhysX, Audio, Audiokinetic WWISE, FMOD, Other, SpeedTree. A significant share of the available middleware already runs natively on Linux, only a very few run exclusively on Linux. Available IDEs and source code editors. Numerous source code editors and IDEs are available for Linux, among which are Sublime Text, Code Blocks, Qt Creator, Emacs, or Vim. Multi-monitor. A multi-monitor setup is supported on Linux at least by AMD Infinity and AMD Catalyst. Xenair Armor and Rand are on both X11 and Wayland. Serious Sam 3, BFE is one example of a game that runs natively on Linux and supports very high resolutions and is validated by AMD to support their Infinity. Civilization V is another example, it even runs on a Kaveri desktop APU and 3x1 portrait mode. Voice over IP. The specifications of the Mumble protocol are freely available and there are BSD-licensed implementations for both servers and clients. The positional audio API of Mumble is supported by, for example, Cube2, Sauerbraten. Wine. Wine is a compatibility layer that provides binary compatibility and makes it possible to run software that was written and compiled for Microsoft Windows on Linux. The Wine project hosts a user-submitted application database that lists programs and games along with ratings and reviews which detail how well they run with Wine. Wine AppDB also has a commenting system, which often includes instructions on how to modify a system to run a certain game which cannot run on a normal or default configuration. Many games are rated as running flawlessly, and there are also many other games that can be run with varying degrees of success. The use of Wine for gaming has proved controversial in the Linux community as some feel it is preventing, or at least hindering, the further growth of native gaming on the platform. Emulators. There are numerous emulators for Linux, a list. There are also APIs, virtual machines, and machine emulators that provide binary compatibility. Linux homebrew on consoles. Linux has been ported to several game consoles, including the Xbox, PlayStation 2, PlayStation 3, GameCube, and Wii, which allows game developers without an expensive game development kit to access console hardware. Several gaming peripherals also work with Linux. Adoption by game engines. Distinction between game engine and other, related software. The game engine is the software, that is some algorithms, solely responsible for the game mechanics. Thus there are completely different game engines for first-person shooters, strategy video games, etc. Besides the game mechanics, we also need software to do calculations regarding graphics, audio, video, physics, vegetation, input handling, you name it. Computer games are considered to be among the most complex software there is. Graphics, for FPS for example, game mechanics calculates with vector data and 3D polygon mesh data. This 3D data needs to be transformed into a picture that can be sent to the computer monitor. This is called rendering. Well-known rendering techniques used in computer games are rasterization and ray tracing. The software doing the rendering is called the rendering engine. The rendering is software completely distinct from the game engine. It augments the game engine, but since almost any computer games are played via monitor, a rendering engine is obligate. And since it can be much more difficult to program an efficient rendering engine than some game engine, instead of pairing game engines with rendering engines, it is done the other way around. Audio, 3D audio effect and other techniques require calculations as well. Software doing such calculations could be called the audio engine. For example, FMOD is software doing this. Sound renderer as well, but not for computer games. Other software augmenting the game engine, the most common term is game engine middleware. A physics engine is definitely not a game engine and cannot be considered to be such. It is a potential augmentation that can be incorporated by a game engine. A well-known one is Havoc. Various, for example, SpeedTree is middleware solely concerned with trees, and Euphoria is middleware solely concerned with human body mechanics. Game editor, software to create the game levels and other game elements can be distinct, such as for example GTK Radiant, or heavily interwoven with the game engine. Software such as CryEngine, that can be licensed, is much more than just a game engine. It is rather a software suite that includes most of the above-mentioned software and more. And when it is licensed by some third party, the code for the game engine is probably the one being adjusted the most. CryEngine has more in common with an integrated development environment or a software development kit than with a mere game engine. Game engines that are used by many video games and run on top of Linux include Epic Games, Unreal Engine 1, Unreal Engine 2, Unreal Engine 3, Unreal Engine 4, Crytek, CryEngine, id Software, id Tech 1, id Tech 2, id Tech 3, and id Tech 4. Unigine Corporation, Unigine, Valve, Gold SSE, Source Engine, Leadworks Engine, Unity Technologies, Unity Engine 4, adoption by video games. There are many free and open-source video games as well as commercially distributed proprietary video games that run natively on Linux. Some independent companies have also begun porting prominent video games from Microsoft Windows to Linux. Free and open-source games. Original games. A few original open-source video games have attained notability. Clones and remakes. There are a larger number of open-source clones and remakes of classic games. Proprietary games, available on Steam. Valve officially released Steam for Linux on February 14, 2013. On June 5, 2014, the number of Linux-compatible games on Steam reached 500. Listed below are some of the games available on Steam for Linux. Independent game developers. Independent developer 2D-Boy released World of Goo for Linux. Role-playing video game titles like Echelon, Book I, Echelon, Book 2 and Penny Arcade Adventures, On the Rain Slick Precipice of Darkness were developed cross-platform from the start of development, including a Linux version. Sillysoft released Linux versions of their game Lux and its various versions. Hemisphere Games has released a Linux version of Osmos. Coonsolo has released a Linux version of Mystic Mine. Amanita Design has released Linux versions of Machinarium and Summerost 2. Ageist released a Linux version of their futuristic racing game H-Craft Championship. Gammarizon has released a Linux version of QuantZ. Interaction Studios has several titles mostly in the Chicken Invaders series. Krystanix Games has released Linux versions of Crossword Twist, Fantastic Farm, Guess the Phrase, Jewel Twist, Kakuro Epic, Mahjong Epic, Marxi Dice, Solitaire Epic, Sudoku Epic, Theseus and the Minotaur. Ananke Games has released a Linux versions of Path of Magic, Runes of Avalon 2, Soccer Cup Solitaire, The Perfect Tree and Dress Up Pups. Gaslamp Games released a Linux version of Dungeons of Dma. Broken Rules has released a Linux version of And Yet It Moves. Frictional Games released Linux versions of both Penumbra, Black Plague and Penumbra, Overture, as well as the expansion pack Penumbra, Requiem. They also released Amnesia, The Dark Descent for Linux simultaneously with the Windows and Mac OS X versions. S2 Games released Linux clients for their titles Savage, The Battle for Newarth, Savage 2, A Tortured Soul and Heroes of Newarth. Warfire Games released a Linux version of their game Lugaru and they will release its sequel Overgrowth for Linux. David Rosen's Black Shades was also ported to Linux. Arctic Paint has released a Linux version of Number Drill. Charlie Euro Unregistered Trademark S Games has released a Linux version of Bullet Candy Perfect, Irokanji, Space Phallus and Scaregasm. Ilwinter Game Design released Conquest of Elysium 2, Dominions, Priests, Prophets and Pretenders, Dominions 2, The Ascension Wars, and Dominions 3, The Awakening for Linux. Introversion Software released Darwinia, Upperlink, and DEFCON. Cartesian Theatre is a Vancouver, Canada-based software house specializing in free, commercial, games for GNU Linux. They have one title currently under active development, Ovania. Got in Action Creative Artle released their Steel Storm games for Linux. Hazardous Software have released their game ACHRON for Linux. Unigine Corporation developed Oil Rush using its Unigine engine technology that works on Linux. Unigine Corporation was also developing a shooter-type game that would have been released for Linux. Currently the development on this game is frozen until Oil Rush is released. The MMORPG game Syndicates of Archon is also supposed to be coming to Linux. The game Dialogues, The Winds of War is also being developed with Unigine and is planned to have a Linux client. A number of visual novel developers support Linux. Winter Wolves has released titles such as Spirited Heart, Hylian, The Flower Shop, Bionic Heart, Card Sweethearts, Vera Blank, Planet Stronghold, and Lauren the Amazon Princess for Linux. Hanako Games has released Science Girls, Summer Session, Date Warp, Cute Night Kingdom, and are considering porting Fatal Hearts to Linux. Seiki Visual has brought Jose, Kanzu, Yase, RE, Alistair and Ripples to Linux. Four Leaf Studios has also released Katua Shoujo for Linux and Christine Love released Digital, A Love Story, both of which, along with Summer Session mentioned previously, are powered by the free software NP tool. In March 2012 Marcel Weyers released the horror visual novel Sleepless Night. The Java-based sandbox game Minecraft by indie developer Mojang is available on Linux, as is any other video game compiled for the Java Virtual Machine. Dwarf Fortress, a sandbox management simulator/roguelike, has been made available for Linux by Tarn Adams. The voxel-based space sandbox game, Scrumble Ship by indie developer Dirksen is currently under development for Linux, Mac OS X, and Windows. The realistic replay baseball simulation Out of the Park Baseball by OOTP Developments is currently available for Linux, Mac OS X, and Windows, for single-player and multiplayer online leagues. Grappling Hook, a first shooter-like puzzle game. Game porters. Independent companies have also taken on the task of porting prominent Windows games to Linux. Lockheed Software was the first such company, and between 1998 and 2002 ported Civilization, Call to Power, Dissenter Cubed, Eric's Ultimate Solitaire, Heavy Gear 2, Heavy Metal, FAK Chaos Squared, Heretic 2, Heroes of Might and Magic 3, Koan, Immortal Sovereigns, Myth 2, Soul Blighter, Postal, Railroad Tycoon 2, Quake 3 Arena, Rune, Sid Meier's Alpha Centauri, SimCity 3000, Soldier of Fortune, Tribes 2, and Mindrover to Linux. Tribsoft created a Linux version of Jagged Alliance 2 by Certec Canada before shutting down in 2002. Linux Game Publishing was founded in 2001 in response to the impending demise of Lockheed, and has brought Creatures, Internet Edition, Candy Cruncher, Majesty, Gold Edition, Ningpo Mahjong, Hyperspace Delivery Boy, Software Tycoon, Postala Squared Share the Pain, Soul Ride, X2, The Threat, Gorky 17, Cold War, Knights and Merchants, The Shattered Kingdom, Ballistics, X3, Reunion, Jetsnaguns, Sacred, Gold, Shadowgrounds, and Shadowgrounds Survivor to Linux. Some of these games were ported for them by Ryan C. Gordon. LGP associated but freelance consultant Frank C.L. is porting the game Caster to Linux and has released the first episode and also developed the Linux version of Cortex Command being included in the second Humble Indie bundle. He is also working towards other porting projects such as the entire Myth series. He is largely taking recommendations and he comments as part of the Phoronix community. Iculus.org has ported beta releases for Medal of Honor, Allied Assault and Devastation, versions of America's Army, and the titles Prey, Aquaria, Braid, Hammerfight and Cogs. The German publisher Runesoft was founded in 2000. They ported the games Northland, Robin Hood, The Legend of Sherwood, Airline Tycoon Deluxe, Ankh, Heart of Osiris, Barkanoi 2, and Jack Keen to Linux, as well as porting Knights and Merchants, The Shattered Kingdom and Software Tycoon, for Linux Game Publishing. Hyperion Entertainment ported games to several systems. They have ported Shogo, Mobile Armor Division and Sin to Linux, as well as porting Gorky 17 for Linux Game Publishing. Whimkeep Entertainment has brought the games The Labyrinth of Time and Inherit the Earth, Quest for the Orb to Linux. Alternative Games brought Trine and Shadowgrounds Survivor for Linux Game Publishing, having ported games to Mac OS X since 1996. Video game publisher Feral Interactive released XEOM, Enemy Unknown, its first game for Linux, in June 2014. Other developers, Summit Software employees ported the Doom series, the Quake series, Return to Castle Wolfenstein, Enemy Territory and Enemy Territory, Quake Wars. Some games published by Garage Games which have Linux versions include Bridge Builder, Marble Blast Gold, Gish, Think Tanks, Tribal Trouble, and Dark Horizons, Lore Invasion. MP Entertainment released Hopkins FBI and Crack.com released Abuse for Linux, becoming one of the first developers to release a native port. Inner Worlds, another early commercial Linux title, was released for and partly developed on Linux. Firelo's Laboratories released a Linux version of Theocracy on the retail disc. Absolutist has supported Linux for a number of years. Glamis GmbH released a Linux version of their game Mobility. Lava Lord Games released their game Astro Battle for Linux. Xatrix Entertainment released a Linux version of Kingpin, Life of Crime. BioWare released Neverwinter Nights for Linux. Crow Team released the Serious Sam series, with the first game ported by Ryan C. Gordon and with the second self-ported. Ryan C. Gordon also ported Epic Games shooter games Unreal Tournament 2003 and Unreal Tournament 2004. Revolution System Games released their game Decadence, Home Sweet Home through Steam only for Linux for a period of time after Mac or Windows release. On October 12, 2013, Lars Gustafsson, creative director at DICE, said to Polygon.com, commercial games for non-x86 instruction sets. Some companies ported games to Linux running on instruction sets other than x86, such as Alpha, PowerPC, Spark, MIPS or ARM. Lockheed Entertainment Software ported Civilization, Call to Power, Eric's Ultimate Solitaire, Heroes of Might and Magic 3, Myth 2, Soul Blighter, Railroad Tycoon 2 Gold Edition and Sid Meier's Alpha Sentry with Alien Crossfire expansion pack to Linux Power PC. They also ported Civilization, Call to Power, Eric's Ultimate Solitaire, Sid Meier's Alpha Sentry with Alien Crossfire expansion pack to Linux Alpha and Civilization, Call to Power, Eric's Ultimate Solitaire to Linux Spark. Linux Game Publishing published Candy Cruncher, Majesty Gold, Ningpo Mahjong and Soul Ride to Linux Power PC. They also ported Candy Cruncher, Soul Ride to Linux Spark and Soul Ride to Linux Alpha. Ilwinter Game Design ported Dominions, Priests, Prophets and Pretenders, Dominions 2, The Ascension Wars and Dominions 3 to Linux Power PC and Conquest of Elysium 3 to Raspberry Pi. Hyperion Entertainment ported Sin to Linux Power PC published by Titan Computer and Gorky 17 to Linux Power PC which later was published by LGP. Runesoft hired Gunnar von Boeing which ported Robin Hood The Legend of Sherwood to Linux Power PC. Later Runesoft ported Airline Tycoon Deluxe to Raspberry Pi was running Debian GNU Linux. Source ports. Several developers have released the source code to many of their legacy titles, allowing them to be run as native applications on many alternative platforms, including Linux. Examples of games which were ported to Linux this way include Duke Nukem 3D, Shadow Warrior, Rise of the Triad, Ken's Labyrinth, Seven Kingdoms, Warzone 2100, Homeworld, Call to Power 2, Wolfenstein 3D, Heretic, Hexen, Hexen 2, Aliens vs Predator, Descent, Descent 2 and Free Space 2. Several game titles that were previously released for Linux were also able to be expanded or updated because of the availability of game code, including Doom, Abuse, Quake, Quake 2, Quake 3 Arena and Jagged Alliance 2. Some derivatives based on release source code have also been released for Linux, such as Aleph 1 and Micropolis for Marathon 2, Durandal and SimCity respectively. Certain game titles were even able to be ported due to availability of shared engine code even though the game's code itself remains proprietary or otherwise unavailable, such as the video game Strife or the multiplayer component of Star Trek, Voyager, Elite Force. Some games have even been ported entirely or partially by reverse engineering and game engine recreation such as Warcraft 2 through Wargus or Commander Keen. Another trick is to attempt hacking the game to work as a mod on another native title, such as with the original Unreal. Additionally, some games can be run through the use of Linux-specific runtime environments, such as the case of certain games made with adventure game studios such as the CHZO Mythos or certain titles made with the RPG Maker tool. Games derived from released code, with both free and proprietary media, that are released for Linux include Urban Terror, Open Arena, Free Doom, World of Padman, Nikchai Zonotic, Wara Sectionau and Excalibur, Morgana's Revenge. Massively multiplayer online role-playing games. This is a selected list of MMORPGs that are native on Linux. See also. References. External links, directories and lists. Linux Game Database is a large database for native Linux games. It contains more than 1460 games as of November 9, 2013. Le Botin Desja Linux is an online database for native Linux games. Pengusby claims to contain only the best games, and as such does not contain all native titles. It currently only contains 186 games. LinApp is a database of commercial Linux software, including games. The Linux Gamers Game List is a detailed list of games for Linux. The BrigameWiki offers detailed coverage, exclusively of free software games with free content media. 100 Linux Games provides a list of 100 best free Linux games. Games on Linux is a database of commercial Linux games. Universal Video Game List is a database that includes a list of over 6,000 Linux games. News and commentary. Gaming on Linux. Eurogaming on Linux is an active Linux gaming news website. Linuxgames.com. Linux Games is one of the oldest Linux gaming news sources, since 1998.